help me?
It is very true.
I don't want to get bit. Can you help me?
Uh-huh.
The trust is there, you know?
Absolutely.
I don't think you let me get bit. Hey guys!
Hey!
Today it's Michelle and Seamus.
Seamus.
Yeah, Bridget has laryngitis, so she has nothing to contribute. Today we thought we would talk about a topic of how your dog how you could guide your dog better in adapting to life changes, as you kind of progress. That could be moving, that could be having kids, that could be dating and marrying somebody, that could be cohabitating with somebody who also has a dog. So any big transitional periods or life changes that could happen. Mm-hmm. And we figured first we'd talk about why it's important to try to plan for those things and have kind of an idea of how and what your dog is going to need to be successful through those periods.
Right. So, in terms of especially planning to have children and stuff, it's something that you can preemptively kind of get ahead of that and not make it a last minute kind of as we go kind of thing,
Like, I'm 9 months pregnant.
Right.
What do I do?
Yes, like, let's try to do it now, because obviously your hands are going to be very full, but you're going to be very busy and stuff. So having the time prior to having your child and everything is very important. So kind of working on small little things in terms of training, whether it be duration or just certain commands with on the walk if you're going to be working with the strollers and stuff like that, those are the first things that at least come to my mind, with kind of working on stuff prior to the baby.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the biggest key component to being successful in any of these situations is just training your dog as soon as you get it.
Well, yes. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Because I think like any of these situations in an ideal world, all of this stuff could either happen when you plan it, which would be ideal, right? You plan to move somewhere, you plan to have a child, you plan to cohabitate with someone, whatever. But there's also many circumstances where maybe this stuff just has to happen, like immediately.
Yeah.
So in that case, you do have a shorter time frame to try and prepare your dog for it. And if they're not even have a good foundation of training to begin with, then you're already kind of out of luck, or at least you're at a much bigger disadvantage. So I think that planning in advance, where I've had many clients come and they're like, we plan on having kids in like 5 years, so we wanted to train our dog now and get everything really under control so that by the time that rolled around, we were like smooth sailing, which I think is great. So as soon as you get your dog, whether it's an adult dog, a puppy, it doesn't really matter, you should always start doing like age-appropriate training right off the bat so that then you at least have like the bare bones foundation of good communication, and then you can kind of like specialize that to whatever the life change might be. So I'd say like maybe in the context of moving, what would be some of your advice, Seamus, you think, for if you were going to like move and change completely different environments?
Well, it kind of, for me, the first things that I think of is, you get a dog that is moving into a new environment. There might be some of that separation anxiety as you're moving stuff in, or as you're finally moved in. There might be that marking, in the house in a new place, that they want to go and mark around and stuff. So again, coming at those two big things, I think working on your distance and that anxiety and dealing with that and stuff would be one really good thing to kind of preemptively you could work on even in your living environment before you move and stuff, as well as the marking, just making sure that it is very clear where that boundary is of it going in the house is not okay, going out of the house is, Now, how, in terms of like other things, let's see, what else do we have? What are the other like major things you think of moving in?
I would say that sometimes it can depend on where you're moving, you know, and what specific
That's true, too.
challenges you might face. Like if you're going from like more of like a suburban home type environment and you're moving to like a city, or like apartments,
noise
you
and-
know,
yeah.
or stuff like that, you can certainly have big environmental changes that could be different. And in that case, I would take into context like where you're moving, what is going to be different about or have to be different about your lifestyle there, and try to like preemptively just shape your current environment so it's like a smoother, less drastic change, you know? So I think that like crating could sometimes be a big piece for people because maybe they live somewhere and the dog doesn't need to be crated because the dog's very comfortable in that space and in that environment, whatever. And if they bark sometimes out the windows, it's not a big deal because the neighbors are pretty far away. But then they
Or
move.
there's less interactions of barking, so
Exactly.
they see it less often, but when they move to the city and it's more current, it'll be more common.
Exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
like preemptively just going back to crating for a little bit can be really helpful because the crate is something that while everything else is changing, the crate doesn't.
Always the same.
Always
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah.
So crate training just in and of itself is super important, and that gives your dog a little bit of consistency where they're like, okay, this is a brand new place, brand new environment, but like I know crate.
Yes.
That
If
makes
I
me
am
comfortable.
feeling anxious, at least I have this one place where I can kind of fall back to.
Exactly, yeah, that familiarity of it and everything. And I think that overall, that concept of just like remaining consistent for your dog, because I think as like people, it's very easy to maybe see our dog. I'm sorry.
He's out.
This is killing me. I don't know how I get anything done with this dog around. It's easy to like see the dog struggle with the transition and feel bad for them.
Yeah.
And then we almost tend to like compensate for that by
Yes.
like loosening up our traditional guidelines or rules.
Right.
But in
Well,
reality,
this is a new environment, so I'll take it easy on you and I'll let you go at your own pace. But then they take full advantage of that, or it just
exactly,
gets worse, right?
exactly, or it gets
Yeah.
worse because they're already anxious because of the transition and the weird stuff that's happening, and then on top of that, we change.
Yeah.
So literally nothing's consistent anymore or predictable.
Right.
And then it just kind of spirals out of control at that point. So yeah, I would say like moving, it would be like stay as consistent as you possibly can. Take into account where you're moving and what the lifestyle is going to be like there, and really try to make sure that any of the tools or management techniques or training skills that you need to be successful there, your dog is already prepared for and good at.
Right. Another thing I think transferring over kind of what you're saying from more of like a suburban area to city is walking.
Yeah,
you get a
definitely.
lot of clients that they have all these acres and their dog can kind of go and they can have a little bit more freedom. But if you are transitioning from there to a city where you need to be a little bit closer in that bubble with the come command and stuff and not as loose, when you're walking around, that is something that definitely taken that into consideration when before you're moving, get them more routine and clean that up a little bit.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But
Yeah, there's been like adult dogs that have come in where that's literally the exact problem. They're like, we never had him on a leash.
yeah. Yep.
And now we live somewhere where he has to be on a leash, and like they're alligator rolling and
Yep, you
doing
get the leash
backflips
reactivity and all that
yeah,
stuff
it's
as
like
well,
a
yeah.
whole thing. So yeah, that stuff is super important.
Right. Something easy to look over,
Oh yeah,
So it's-
definitely, because it's not a problem until it is,
Exactly.
and
Right.
I
And
think
then
that's
it's become a big problem.
Yeah.
Very quickly, Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
What were some other big life changes? We could move to maybe a new relationship.
Yeah.
You
A new
start dating somebody?
relationship is one thing, but also a new relationship where they also have just any pet in general, whether
Yeah.
a dog, cat, if they're not if your dog has never seen a cat or interacted, that can be a huge difference,
Oh, yeah.
Especially if there is that like prey drive and everything. And then, just in terms of just other dogs, socialization obviously is super important. From the day you get them, making sure that they're getting that proper socialization, so that if they ever are in that situation, that they have a little bit of that ground level work already of like, okay, this is something that we can work on, you know?
Yeah, or even you start dating somebody and they don't train their dog.
Right.
Or
yeah.
maybe they don't train your dog the way that you do, or all that stuff
Or
can
as
kind of
strict.
cause like turbulence
Yep.
in the relationship.
Absolutely.
So I would say like maybe we can start with the context of like you don't live together. You know,
Right.
you're just dating
Yeah.
at this point, and you want to be able to have your dogs hang out and you know stuff like that. I think that depending on your dog's personality, of course, every dog's gonna be different, but I'd say like best case scenario, introductions should be done on more of like a neutral space.
Yeah.
So I would
agree.
avoid, unless your dog historically has done totally fine with dogs coming into your home and stuff like that, and they don't care, because there's some dogs like that.
Yeah.
But that can be an added element that makes it a little bit more testy. So neutral space, off leash, of course. If you don't have the ability to have like a fenced-in area that you feel comfortable, your dogs aren't off-leash trained, you can always do like long lines to simulate being off-leash, but you still have the control of the leash if you needed it.
Right.
Sometimes going for walks together and not even letting the dogs interact can be a really good one.
I think that's a really good like first introduction where
Yeah.
it's not this like hyped up, because I think a lot of people, you know, they know their dog well or whatever, but introducing to that new dog, they're like, okay, you know, like, let's go have them play, and then they have this huge rush, and that's where most of those fights start, is in that first couple seconds of interacting, you know, so I do think that the walking is really important, and it's just like, you know, if you are dating something or it's something good to do, you know, so I think that is really important for me personally, and then getting into the socialization, but
no, I agree. And that kind of can come into play with like not rushing things.
Right.
And trying to like make your dogs like best friends right off the bat when, you know, that might not be the best thing.
What you want to happen, but it, like you just said, it might not be the best thing.
Did you and Mal get Sully after you were together? Did
Yeah.
you get him together?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I had Lumos and Cash when I met Tom, and he had his two dogs, Barney and Blue, at the time. So we kind of did a similar thing where, and I had the added element where my dog Lumos is people and dog aggressive too.
Yep.
So that added extra thing. So for our dogs, Lumos has always been a little bit more tolerant of dogs than new people, but it was a lot of walking, you know, just taking them out at the same time. Tom also did not train his dogs when I met him either. So there were all the variables there.
Right.
It was like 2 weeks into our relationship, I was like, I either need to train your dogs or I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
It was too much. I obviously trained his dogs. But yeah, and we did kind of a similar thing. Kind of took it slow relatively. Did individual meetings. I think a big piece of that is so like I had multiple dogs, he had multiple dogs. It was not like all four of you, here you go. It was very much like we had one dog meet one dog, and then that dog meet the other dog, and then, you know, just one at a time constantly. And then it was like, okay, they're all doing pretty well together. Thankfully, his dogs were they were probably the nicest of all of them, you know, when it came to it. So they were pretty fine. And then over time, they just got more and more comfortable and everything too. So
So you're just taking it slow and stuff. I think that's really important too. Yeah, especially I didn't even think about that, like multiple dogs in a household too. Yeah. You want to do that individually is really important.
And there's a healthy balance of when the dogs do interact, knowing like what is okay with communication wise and what you should let them kind of figure out on their own versus like what you need to step in with. And like, cause like Barney, his like hound pit bull mix, and my dog Lumos, their first initial interaction was not ideal. But, like, nobody got hurt or anything, but Barney made a really silly decision where he immediately ran over to Lumos and just tried to mount him. And Lumos corrected him for it.
Yeah.
And we let it go because I was like, fair enough.
Right.
You know what I mean? If nobody takes it too far. Yeah, that's fine, that's fine. And honestly, they're buddies now. But, like, that was, like, the initial thing, and Barney was like, crap. Guess I won't do that again.
And in the same sense, you know, like, yeah, it probably wasn't his smartest idea, but it was something where he learned really quick that he's probably shouldn't do that again. You know?
Yeah. Well, and Barney went to a lot of dog parks growing up, and he would do that all the time. Like, that was like his go-to move, was just to mount every single dog he met. So we kind of expected that he was going to try that. And again, this comes back to knowing your dogs in these situations. I knew that Lumos was not going to be okay with it, and he would correct him. And I was like, you know, if it turns into something where Barney doesn't take the correction well or whatever, then we'll have to intervene. And I set it up safely and everything. But thankfully, it was like Barney tried, Lumos corrected him, and then that was it. And it was over.
But that's why it's, again, knowing your dogs, it's important to do that individually, because I think sometimes people can overthink, you know, and this is why dog parks are so scary sometimes, because, yeah, two dogs might be kind of starting stuff or whatever, and then they get in a fight, but all it takes is that, like, high intense stimulation, and then every dog jumps in, right? And instead of dealing with 2 dogs, now you're dealing with 4 dogs, right? So it's something where it's like, you really, again, knowing your dog and being like, all right, well, this might be a trigger. And I feel like I get a lot of, like, clients and stuff that think about that in the sense of, once I kind of call them out, I'm like, okay, well, if you really think about it, you know what the triggers are, right? If you're on a walk and you know, like, okay, that bike is going to be that trigger, right? Whereas, like, that person just walking, that's fine, right? So it's like, okay, you can be a little bit more relaxed. But when you see that dog or that bike or that trigger, right, then it's something that we need to be more aware of that, right? Take advantage of those teaching moments. That being in a social, I think, is super important as well, you know?
Well, and it's important to have those conversations up front, too. Like, actually, like, sit down and be like, okay, like, what's the extent of socialization that your dog has had? How much does mine have? How much do we really know about them? My dog, you know, like I did with Tom, I was like, he's like, Barney mounts everything, and I was like, Lumos hates that. So we're gonna see what happens, you know? So that way, at least you're going into it very prepared. You both have a basic knowledge of your own dogs and a little bit of information about the other dog. And so neither of you are gonna be taken off guard by, like, something crazy happening.
And obviously, it's better safe than sorry. If you need to put a muzzle on, put a muzzle on. You know? But I think those are really big ones, as well as communication just between, like, the owners as well. How comfortable do you feel about me bringing my dog in, you know, and stuff like that. Like, I think that's a super important thing. And in terms of communicating, you know, kind of moving into, you were dating, living separately, but now we're starting to, like, think about moving in, you know, and together and stuff. It's, all right, so am I going to take responsibility for your dogs too? Or, like, are you going to be correcting my dog? You know, like, how did that work out for you guys? Like,
so, I mean, obviously, me being a dog trainer, like, I kind of am just in charge of the dogs. I kind of just took over in that aspect. And he was like, by all means, whatever.
Because,
so,
you know.
Thankfully, he did not give me any pushback. I know that there's probably some couples out there that it's like, you know, if you come in and you start trying to, like, change the way they do stuff with their dogs and change everything, that there's going to be pushback because they live this way with their dogs and you live this way with your dogs. So I think there's definitely, like, a way to tactfully, you know, introduce, like, oh, well, you know, when I live with my dog, here's the expectations that I have, and I want to make sure we can be on the same page so that there's not, like, unnecessary conflict with everything. Because, of course, the decision to move in with somebody is a big deal, and you're going to talk about a lot of different things, at least hopefully people are, before you do that.
In together,
Right. And weirdly enough, I think, like, how people live with their dogs and how they structure things with their dogs, a lot of times it gets left out, and people don't even talk about it. And then all of a sudden you live with somebody and you see everything that, you know, they do that you think is wrong, and I'm sure they're looking at you the same way. And then things get really high conflict pretty easily. But yeah, thankfully Tom was, like, very open-minded, took a lot of, like, really good direction and information from me and didn't have any issue with it. And he was really willing to, like, learn how to train his dogs and stuff like that. So I got pretty lucky in that respect. With Lumos specifically, because he's also like human aggressive with people that he doesn't know, let alone somebody who's like living in his intimate space, right? Of like an actual house with him. One of the biggest things that I was happy that I did with him, even all the way up prior to meeting Tom, was I tried to live with him in the healthiest way possible, knowing that he had that really, really protective propensity about him.
Yeah.
Because I think what can happen is we live with our dogs single in a completely different way than we'd have to eventually live with them when we're in a relationship. And so it's like all of a sudden, literally our relationship has to change, as well as the surroundings and all the stuff.
And that goes back to like resource guarding and stuff like that. You know, if you don't have that separation with your dog, and then now you're moving in and you're hanging out with your, you know, significant other on the couch or something like that. You know, some dogs don't like that. You know? So it's something where, I could definitely see. Yeah,
there's so many clients that are like, oh, we can't even hug.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like stuff as severe as that, where they can't even like show each other affection in front of the dog because it's like the end of the world. So, and what has to be really the way that you address that stuff is like whoever. So like in the case of me, it was obviously Lumos was overly protective of me, right? And again, I can train and train and train all of that I want, but like the personality of a Dutch Shepherd is not going to change.
Yeah, that is its breed.
Change.
That is what he's made
he's
for,
like,
and,
that's the person, and I will die for that person. You know, that's just
and
how
that
he's
goes
wired.
into a whole nother topic of knowing
the
your
breeds
dog
that
before,
you're getting and stuff. Yeah,
but that's a whole different.
But like, so with him, it was I had to be on top of him all the time. Because I mean, even to the extent, I'd say the two incidents, and I think incidents, unfortunately, in a situation like with a dog of my caliber that I had are gonna be somewhat unavoidable because you can't be perfect all the time.
Right.
You have to mitigate risk as much as you can, but like you can't be perfect all the time. The two incidents that we had with Lumos and Tom were, the one was Tom like snuck up behind me or something and like surprised me or something and like grabbed me, and Lumos came up and bit him right on the ass. Because I was like, oh my god.
Rightfully so, yeah.
And like he didn't break skin or anything. Right. He was just like, excuse me, watch yourself. The other time was I was like petting Lumos, and Lumos was like on the couch. I was like crouched down petting him. Tom walked behind me and I think like kissed me on the head or something, and Lumos was like, boom, you know. He didn't make contact or anything. I addressed that. And it was, the important thing is that in those situations, the dog that is, or the person that the dog is guarding needs to be the one that addresses it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because Lumos needs to see from me that I'm like, absolutely not. That behavior is not acceptable. Right. You can't behave that way.
Because clearly it's also like, it's not a dangerous situation right there. So it's like for you to like turn around and yell at Tom or something.
Exactly,
right? It's like he's not trying to do anything wrong. Obviously he's not trying to piss Lumos off. So
the dog needs to recognize that like, no. There's nothing threatening about this situation at all. You're just being a dick.
You don't get to dictate what goes on.
Yeah, exactly. And over time, obviously, as like you maintain those strict boundaries, and you're smart and proactive. Like I did a lot of bed stays with him initially. It's funny because before we moved in together, the first time that Tom came over to my house where I was living, I had Lumos like on a bed stay because I was like, I don't know who this guy is.
Right.
So Lumos is on a bed stay at the corner of the living room, and Tom comes in the door, and Lumos is just staring at him the whole entire time. Everywhere he went, he was just looking at him. And he was fine. He was on his bed stay. I wasn't worried he was going to do anything because he knew he had to stay there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, from the beginning, he was like, who is this guy? So... And that's what I mean is I tried to set those boundaries like right off the bat.
Right.
You know, and I didn't try to rush the process. I wasn't like, oh, they need to love each other and be best friends right away. Like
he needs. If you just let him say hi to you, then he'll be cool. You know, I get that so much.
Yeah. No, and obviously now like Lumos and Tom are like totally fine.
Right.
Like best buddies. So it just takes time sometimes with a specific dog, and you just have to try to mitigate as much risk along the way. Prepare, do a lot of like the obedience commands to help give them a little bit more management and stuff like that.
I think another thing that I see a little like quite often is there's sometimes you have one owner that is a little bit more productive or dedicated than another.
Yeah.
So that's why I was curious on how you guys kind of dealt with it, because if it's something, in that situation of, this is my significant other's dog, and he does it this way or whatever, like, I don't know if I feel comfortable doing it that way or whatever, So it's something that, again, having that communication between each other, like, is super important as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you don't feel comfortable correcting your dog or having them held on a bedstay or whatever, you have to have that communication with that, because it's something where it's like, if it's something where you need to do that, if you're home alone and whatever, there has to be that, because then that gets into inconsistency, and then that can be really confusing for the dog as well.
Sure.
So it's something I feel like you either have to be full in or full out.
Well, and there's definitely something to be said too for, like, as weird as this may sound, you don't have to be responsible for the other person's dog if you don't think you're in a place to do that.
Exactly.
Like, it was like a big chunk of time where, like, thankfully Lumos could come to work with me, and I was able to keep him with me majority of the time. But if I ever wasn't home and I couldn't have Lumos with me, he was honestly just in a crate until I got home. Tom didn't really do anything with him, stuff like that. Of course, we had the added element as well with Tom having a kid, so that was a whole nother piece of the puzzle. But like, I didn't have Tom do a lot with Lumos, because Lumos is not going to, it's like he has layers to him.
Yeah.
It's like, just because he likes you and he tolerates you to a certain degree does not mean he's also going to take a correction from you or that he's going to take direction from you well either.
Right.
So it's like, while Lumos really liked Tom, if Tom had to handle him or correct him or have him out in public or took him on a walk and another dog ran up, like, there were so many scenarios in my head that I was like, that could go so wrong so fast.
Yeah.
Because Lumos is just such a specific type of dog, So those are little things too, where it was like, until I really felt like the relationship that they had was to the point where Lumos would listen to Tom in a very high stretch situation, I didn't even have Tom do a lot with him, because I didn't think it was that big of a deal.
That's the tolerance and the respect,
Yes.
It's like, I can tolerate you, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean I respect you completely, you know what I
Exactly.
mean, or whatever. So I
Yeah.
think that's really important as well. But so then that's another interesting kind of thing is with kids,
Yes. Yes.
kind of going back to having the babies and stuff like that, starting from the young age, you first bring the baby home, whatever. My biggest concern that I get from owners, I feel, is the jumping.
Yes.
So that's one thing. You should
the
already be nipping out.
overexcited interest and stuff
Right.
like that.
You should already be like nipping that out, nipping that in the butt. Again, like you were saying, like right when you get that dog jumping, you should just, regardless of the size of the dog, I think it's something, because that kind of feeds into then the furniture access. I had a client a little bit ago that they just had their baby, but their dog just wants to come up, and they're fine with the baby. They just want to lick the baby, but then they want to just keep licking the baby, and then they want to always be in the face. They always want to be in the middle of everything.
Yep.
And that's where it's just like, again, your hands are full. You're so busy that you should not have to feel obligated to entertain that dog, right?
Yep.
And so I feel like, just the basics, furniture access, making those very clear lines of, when I'm with this baby, you are not dictating, okay, I'm going to come up on my own.
Well, and that could go back to even too, like, figuring out, how do I want to live with a baby and a dog, like, before it happens?
Yeah.
Because
Get
if your
your
dog
ideas
has
set.
furniture access, and you're like, wow, it's going to be really annoying when I sit on the couch and my dog runs from the other side of the room and bulldozes its way up
Lands
onto the
right on,
couch, whereas now that's not a big deal. What if I have an infant sitting next to me on the couch? It's better to start removing couch privileges now and have 6 months to do that versus right now when you bring the baby home and you're like, oh crap, like, this needs to change immediately.
Right. As well as like the resource guard and stuff like that, that is my biggest thing as well. With when I get a dog that has any sort of resource guardian and they have any sort of plans with having kids, is get very, very strict with like, we need to focus on this right now because, you know, it's something that down the road, you know, it's scary and we want to deal with it now, but let's deal with it when there isn't a 1 or 2 year old kid crawling around and trying to take the dog's toys, right?
Exactly.
You know, so that has always like scared me kind of the most with behavioral issue wise, you know. Like the jumping, obviously, you don't want the dog like jumping on your kid and stuff, but the resource guarding obviously can lead to a lot more aggression.
Yeah, I would say that probably, at least in my experience, the biggest causes for kids getting bit by dogs is either it's resource guarding issues, whether it's objects, space, people, whatever, or the dog interacting, or the kid interacting inappropriately with the dog.
Yeah.
You know?
Pulling at the hair.
Exactly. And you have those rare cases where it's not either, and the dog is just an unsafe dog, you know, for them to have been around.
And that's something you have to put in consideration too. You know, if you plan on having a kid and your dog's already bitten 3 people, you know, like.
There are certain dogs that if you're going to bring a child into that home, that dog should not live there. Yeah. Honestly.
And it's the hard pill to swallow, but it's very true. And
there are certain situations where even in the case, this is a little bunny trail, we'll come back, but like maybe you have 2 dogs who don't get along well.
Right.
The last thing you need is a kid as collateral damage in the middle of that. You know, if that happens. So either that gets under control and it's very under control, or again, that might not be the best situation to have a kid. Right. So that could be a tough conversation to have. But all of that aside, I mean, with the resource guarding issues and the inappropriate interactions with the dogs, you kind of have to know, again, it comes back to just really knowing your dog. So all of my dogs, at this point now we have 4, have like different tolerance levels with kids. So like I would say Barney probably has the highest tolerance level. His whole life he's just been phenomenal with children. He's gonna be 15 this year.
Oh wow.
He's an old man now, but
so he's
like he is that rare dog that they could literally honestly do anything to him and he's probably never gonna bite.
Yeah.
And again, I say that lightly because if it has teeth, it could bite. But truly, like before I met my husband, he wasn't the greatest, you know, about how Owen interacted with some of the dogs. So he's obviously, since we've made a lot of changes with that, and Owen didn't know any better. He was a little guy. Right. But thankfully, again, the dogs he was with were just phenomenal with kids. You know, their tolerance level was huge. So that's Barney. And then I'd say the next one would probably be Cash. Cash is another one. His tolerance level is very high. And if he does get uncomfortable, he's either going to, he'll probably growl. He'll slightly growl. Yeah. If he feels like he can't get away. His first option would be to walk away. If he's uncomfortable, he's going to get up and he's going to leave. If he's put in a position where he feels like he can't get away, then he'll growl. And then it becomes my job to somehow, obviously I would catch it before the growl happens, but it becomes my job to intervene and make sure that he doesn't feel like he has to escalate even further because he's like, no one's listening to me.
The flight option is completely gone, so now I have to resort to the fight.
Exactly, yes. And for Cash, when I say like, when times that he would get upset, and this is important too, is there's a line that you need to understand of like, what is an appropriate response from a dog, right? Where they're upset by a kid's interactions with them and what isn't okay. So like a dog being uncomfortable and growling and snapping and going out of their way to be nasty to a kid just because the kid is existing near them, never okay. Cash's issues are like he doesn't like to be hugged. He doesn't like to have people lay on him. He doesn't like stuff like that. So he's totally fine with kids. They can run around. They can do all that crazy stuff. But as soon as they start like getting into his close, intimate space, he's like, no, I don't like this. So again, if he can avoid it, he will. If he can't, he'll just growl. I would say Snoop's probably next, where he honestly just tries to avoid kids altogether. Yeah. Like if he can get to know them, like he loves Elf. Yeah. Obviously he loves my stepson, and stuff like that. So he, once he gets to know them, he's super fine. And it's not like he's even scared of them. He's just like, I'd rather not.
He's over it. Yeah.
Exactly. He just avoids. And then Lumos, obviously, I'd say has the lowest tolerance for young kids, where he just, if he doesn't, again, he just doesn't like most people in general. But with kids especially, fast movements, loud noises, everything is like sudden and by surprise. So for him, if the kid is not a permanent fixture in my life, and honestly, this is kind of a rule for all of my dogs anyways, but especially dogs with a lower threshold for kid nonsense. If the kid is not a permanent fixture, then they just don't need to be around the dog.
Right. There's no need for that. That's my thing.
No.
Too is, that's why the bed stay duration and stuff like that when guests are coming over, or like, during the holidays, you'll have all the nieces and nephews and stuff over like that. It's something where it's just, this is also something that could kind of be related to this as well. It's like, as much as we need to be responsible for our dogs as well, we need to be responsible, or if you're in your situation or whatever, like, I'm sure you and Tom had that conversation with Owen where it's just like, these are the lines.
Yes.
Where it's like, I will take like I'm on my dog, I'm on Lumos, like I will watch him. Yeah. But it doesn't mean you can just go over and like try to give him a hug, right?
Exactly.
Whatever. So I think that is also really important where it's like, yes, as much as we're talking about our dogs and how to take care of our dogs and set them up for success as well, it's like, if kids are involved and they're over, 3 years old,
it's harder to get a kid to listen sometimes than it is a dog. So it's like,
this is true, and that's what I mean. I have no knowledge in that, so like that's a whole different thing.
Well, and it's like, and half the time you can't blame the kid. It's a kid.
Right.
They have like no conscious thought processing half the time.
Right.
Like half the time the stuff they do, they just don't even think about it before they do it. So it's up to us to have a balance of like a place where they feel safe, and it's not like a drastic consequence if they make an innocent mistake.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, that's why I would never put a kid around Lumos who doesn't have the cognitive ability to control themselves, because it's not like a kid who runs up and is like, doggy deserves to get nailed in the face.
Right. Exactly.
No, that's not really fair. So that's where it becomes like a balance.
Yeah.
And so that just becomes the adult's job to manage that situation. Should never leave your dogs unsupervised with kids.
Right.
I don't care. Even Barney, like I was talking about, who would probably like bite himself before he'd bite a kid. Like I would never leave him unsupervised, because you just never know what's going to happen. Right.
Yeah, like when Sully interacts with my nieces and stuff, it is always something where it's like, interacting's a loose word, right? If it's anything, like they'll come up and like say hi or bye and they'll pet him and everything like that. But other than that, there's really little interaction, right? Because it's just not needed. They're doing their own thing, they're having fun. Sully might be in the same room and kind of just watching them because we're in there or whatever, but it's not something where like there needs to be that constant interaction.
Oh yeah. And bed stays, like we were talking about, are a lot of times even younger-ish kids, when they can start grasping concepts and ideas and boundaries a little bit better, a bed stay can be great, where it's like, if the dog is on the bed, don't touch him. That's a very clear line.
It's a very set boundary for the dog and for the kid.
Exactly, so they can coexist together, and the dog gets a break. Sometimes they just get annoyed. Even the most tolerant dog, sometimes they just need a break. They don't want to be around the kids anymore.
Again, the loud noises, fast movements, it's so stimulating, it can be so exhausting.
Exactly.
And just like being people, you get to that point. You can take a lot, but if it's so consistent, then you're
just
gonna
need
get
a break.
that point.
And so that's part of it. I would say there was another one where, unfortunately, my stepson had gotten bit by a neighbor's dog. Was an incident over resource guarding. Again, where, and my stepson had no fault in this situation whatsoever, because he was over at their house. They had 2 dogs, a bigger lab-ish type mix and a little pug. And he'd been over there many, many times without incident. Everything was fine. And then the one day, and he ignored the dogs. And that's kind of how I've tried to work with him as he's gotten older, is just like, ignore dogs. They're not a big deal. If you want to pet a dog, pet our dogs. You don't need to pet everybody else's dogs. I don't know those dogs. And that's another way to keep your kids safe. Just don't let them pet random dogs. Even if the owners say that they're nice, they're probably not nice. Assume they're all mean. And So
all it takes is one ear tug.
exactly, right? And so I guess he had asked, like, hey, can I pet your pug? Because the pug was like, hey, hi, hello. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. And so he starts petting him, and the lab mix comes out of nowhere and just attacks him. Bit him multiple times on his back, on his arm, everything. You can imagine my response to this.
Oh, yeah.
That situation.
Like your
I can't
spider
even
senses started
imagine.
tingling.
Well, I can't even imagine the. If I'm glad I wasn't there when it immediately. I mean, I wish I would have been there,
right.
but I don't know what would have happened had I
To
been
that
there.
dog.
Yeah,
Yeah.
had I been there.
Yeah.
But and the parents knew I was a dog trainer too, so I can only imagine what was going through their head when they're having to walk down to my house and be like, "This is what happened."
Yeah.
And that's another situation where my first question to them was, "Why in the hell is this dog around children?"
Yeah.
Like, and I asked her, I was like, "How many times has this dog done this?" She's like, "Well, he does resource guard. We just never thought it would be over the other dog and blah blah blah." And I said,
So you know those triggers. Again, going
yeah,
back
you
to
know,
where
it's just like
you know
those,
it's a thing.
and that was, I think, a very like earth-shattering, I'm hoping, wake-up call for them of how quickly things can go terribly wrong.
Right.
And, you know, if you know you have a dog that has certain issues, how risky it is to have them around children, to put them in those compromising positions, because, I mean, dogs biting kids, that's a big deal.
That is.
Legally, that can be a really big deal.
Right.
Thankfully,
not to mention life-threatening for both
absolutely.
the dog and the kid. You know. What
yeah,
I mean? So,
absolutely. So,
yeah.
thankfully, I mean, he definitely had some puncture wounds and stuff. Thankfully, it wasn't too extensive. But I mean, he even had a sweatshirt on and a t-shirt, and it still punctured through all of that. Yeah, it was wild. But those are, and it's unfortunate because he's been slightly nervous with dogs ever since.
Yeah.
And I don't blame him.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that's just part of being responsible, is recognizing that, like, while you love your dog, and maybe you don't want to crate them because you feel bad, or maybe you don't want to train them because it makes you feel bad to have to correct them, or maybe this because it makes you feel bad, you can literally alter somebody else's entire experience through life.
Yep.
And create fear in somebody else because you just felt bad.
Because you didn't look at it. Yep.
Yeah, because you
attention.
didn't want to take the time and the energy to train your dog properly. You know?
Yep.
It's just a shame.
And that's why training your dog as soon as possible to prevent these things from happening, because you never know when it will, you know, or it's hard to say when it will sometimes, you know, is super important. So.
Oh yeah, you just have to try to be, and shit happens, mistakes happen, I get it. But if you have the knowledge that your dog has issues and you don't do anything about it, then that's a shame. You know, you should definitely be trying to fix those things.
Yep. And even if they don't have the issues, it's something good to still get on them and make sure that hopefully it won't become an issue. Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
You know, there's one thing that I've noticed from working here is that, you know, I've become a lot better with just noticing the small things that can lead into the bigger things. You know, and I think that I have become a lot quicker to realize it because I've worked here and stuff, and I've been able to work through it. So I've seen a lot of other different interactions in that situations and stuff. But that's also something where, you know, obviously if you are having any sort of issues, reach out to a professional then.
Yes.
You know, get their opinion, you know, and so that way you can get ahead of that curve. Because I think that's another big thing why you want to train your dog as soon as possible, is because you might not notice the major benefits that you are doing for the future in the moment of it, but if you can be consistent about it, then it will help you so much more in the future. You know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think another piece of it, honestly, and this is going to be a very hot topic I'm about to push on.
Let's hear it.
A little bit of an unpopular opinion, is that I think we need to stop shaming people for rehoming their dogs.
Yes.
Or like returning dogs to shelters.
Yes.
Or doing things like that. Because, and here's the thing, I'm not talking about like, oh, because they piss on the floor and you don't want to potty train them, or you don't put the time and energy into it, or they jump up or whatever, you know.
Because it's your fault.
Yeah, like things that obviously are easily fixed with just a little bit of dedication and energy versus like personality parts of the dog that are not going to change. I think it's a lot of the reasons why we have so many unfortunate situations where a dog does something unspeakable is because people are shamed into feeling like they can't ever get rid of their dog. You know what I mean? It's like everyone creates such a bad stigma around like, oh, I couldn't believe that. Imagine just dropping your dog off at a shelter.
Right.
Or imagine just having a kid and then rehoming your dog because you don't want your dog anymore. You know, stuff like that where it's like, you don't know the situation, you don't know the dog, you don't know these people. Like, that was probably the hardest mistake or decision that they ever had to make, you know? And I think that if we just stopped shaming people when a dog doesn't fit their lifestyle, you know? Because ultimately, people have to come first.
Exactly.
The children have to come first.
I hope the owner or the parents would be like, yes, this dog has to go instead of like, you know, because of this kid or whatever, you know, so.
Yeah, so it's like, and again, I'm not saying things that could obviously be mitigated with just some training.
Right.
But like, again, I think if you get to a point where you're like getting rid of your dog, it's probably because you've exhausted all your options. Like you've tried pretty much everything and it's just unsafe.
Yes.
Or whatever it might be, you know? Because it's just sad that, and it's usually the same group of people for the most part that get mad at people for like returning dogs or rehoming dogs that also say you can't use balanced training methods.
Right, yeah.
You can't have both.
Yes.
Either we need to allow people to get rid of a dog that is not safe to be in their lifestyle, or you need to allow them to use punishment when training, because how else are they going to be successful with that dog?
Exactly.
You know?
And it's just, it comes to a point of responsibility, I think, you know, where it's a hard decision, like you were saying. It's probably one of like the hardest decisions to make, but yeah, they have to know that it's for the best, you know what I mean? And again, yeah, like if you're doing all you can, you know, I think I agree with you. I think that it shouldn't be the first option, you know, obviously, but it shouldn't also be completely off the table either.
Exactly.
You know? Because then, and that's where like the whole shaming thing comes in, you know, where it's like a lot of people just don't even see it as an option. They just completely shut that option off. It is like they have to live with it, whether that means the crate or the dog just lives in the crate its whole life or whatever.
Yeah, because
you know what I mean?
you have to think about quality of life with stuff too, you know, and it's a whole thing.
Yep.
And like, and that, I mean, even goes into like not shaming people for going to like ethical, responsible breeders to get a predictable dog. You know, you go to, I think rescuing dogs is very admirable, and I think it's great that people do it, and I want people to do it.
Yes.
But you don't know what you're getting. You know, you have no idea, and genetics are a very real, powerful thing. And you could get a dog, not really see who the dog really is for 6 to 8 months because it's just still adjusting and settling in. And you could end up with a dog, maybe you got a dog that you wanted to go, you're very active and you go hiking and backpacking and you want this dog to hike with you and everything, and you get a dog who is genetically terrified of everything.
Yeah.
Well, that sucks.
Just major anxiety and everything like that.
You know,
right?
it's like, well, that's not going to be fair to the dog because it's terrified its entire life trying to do things that you want to do with it, that you enjoy.
Right.
But like, you can't really take it to do things you enjoy because it's terrified the whole time. So that dog would probably be better off with somebody who likes to stay home and just hang out at home, you know? So I think even in situations like that where it's like, it's just not a good fit for you.
Right.
You know, I just don't think people should get shamed for trying to find a dog that they can enrich the dog's life because they enjoy doing the same things together.
I agree.
You know?
Yep.
But beyond that,
yes,
we went far away from the kid topic.
Yeah, we did. But that's all right. That was still a good topic to address, though.
Yes.
Going back to the responsibilities.
Yes,
but,
right?
yeah, it's, is there anything else?
What other like big life changes? I mean, we hit like moving, we hit relationships, we hit babies and kids.
What would you say about like kind of going back to the moving, like more long distance moving? you know,
Yeah.
where you have to go like across state lines or something with the actual driving part or traveling part. What would you say for that, you know?
I would say if it's possible to
Or is there
travel with your dog in a crate.
Yeah, okay.
I have my
That's
dogs in
kinda
a
what I
crate all the time, no matter what in the car, just because it's the safest option. There's varying levels of things you can do when you travel with your dog in the crate, but or in the car. But crating is definitely the safest because they're contained. They're not going to be a projectile.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
unfortunately something happens.
Exactly,
yeah.
yeah. So I would definitely use the crate because, again, it's just that piece of familiarity for them. They're like, crate, I get that, I understand it.
Yep.
If you can't do the crate because maybe your dog's just too big and your vehicle isn't going to fit it or whatever the situation is, you can always get like those harnesses that you hook into the seatbelt so they're a little bit safer. And again, if your dog is good in the car and doesn't have a lot of anxiety, perfect. If your dog is stressed out in the car and does have a lot of anxiety, I typically have people just give them either like a sit or a down command and just hold them accountable for that. Just so that way they have something to focus on and they're not doing like the panting and the pacing and popping all around and doing all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I've just never had to travel anything
Travel
that long,
that far.
so I've never, so I was curious. Creating, obviously.
Yeah, crating is a good option. Just makes them feel a little more safe and comfortable and everything. And then when you would get to the new environment, I think one thing we didn't maybe touch on was just like really being like overly strict with your boundaries in the new house. And because I know that like obviously when you've lived somewhere a long time, you've been able to kind of like, you know, fix little boundaries here and there over time to get your dog to where like they function very well in your house. And when you move somewhere entirely new, a lot of times we just think like, oh, they're going to behave here the exact same way they behave at home. So we'll leave them unattended to go grab the laundry or get a shower or do stuff like that. And a lot of times the same stuff you could do with your dog before, you're not going to be able to, at least for a little bit.
Yeah.
Because they're like, what in the world is this? So almost kind of going back to like puppyhood again, where it's like either they're supervised or they're in the crate.
Yeah.
And making sure that you're keeping an eye on everyone.
And if you are strict like that, you know, it's not going to make things worse. You know, even if they are, for whatever reason, they do make a really good transition home or something like that. You know, it's still going to be something where having those strict boundaries right off the bat is going to make sure that they're still good, right?
Exactly.
You see them clocking in and doing all this stuff. Okay, yeah, then we can start relaxing a little bit faster. But at least I know that you're good, right?
Yes.
As opposed to just assuming that they're good.
Yeah.
Because that's my like. Again, going back to like my biggest thing was like the marking. I know like that seems to be kind of like a problem
some dogs,
sometimes.
yeah.
Where they just like they get back or whatever, they're anxious and they're in a new place, so they get scared and pee or they mark and pee or whatever, you know. And so that's more of just like an annoyance thing rather than like an issue, I guess. But still, just something to again keep a close eye on them in that situation.
Yeah.
But
So really, I think to sum it all up,
yes.
regardless of what the life transition is, ideally you train your dog before any of these things are happening.
Get ahead of the curve.
Ideally, you're able to plan a reasonable amount of time and start shifting things maybe in your current lifestyle with your dog to help the transition be more smoothly once you do make that big change. And then, I don't know, just be responsible.
Yeah. Know your dog.
Know your dog.
Yep. Know your dog.
Try your best.
Right. And ask for help if you need it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, seek professional training help if you're not really sure how to go about doing things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are really good.
Cool.
Nice. Good job.
Nice talk, Seamus.
Yeah.
This is not the time to lick your butt.